Hello, and welcome to this video where we will be continuing our journey in domain 2 of CISSP, which is the asset security. We have already seen in last two videos that what are the basics of asset security, why do we need an asset inventory, and things like that. But we will now go further in terms of looking into what is that an asset actually processes, what is that an asset actually holds, and that part is data or information, so to say. Now, in CISSP, at times, it is a case that the term data and information is used interchangeably. That's why I have combined both of them into one and talking about data or information life cycle. So in this video, we will dominantly look at the life cycle phase of data or information, how they go through different phases, and what impact does different phases has on the overall life cycle. So to begin with, a data or information is start to exist when the information is either created or it's copied from other location, and we tend to strive to make it useful, index it, and store it. So that is part of the data acquisition. Now, once you have the data, once you gathered or created the data, it has to be, it has to have a purpose for it. And the purpose is extended by how we use the data. Now, in terms of the usage, this is not always about just taking the informational or the business value out of the data, but the usage also tends to go in terms of the security requirements for you to be using that data, maintaining the security. That's where the concept of CIA triad that we have seen in domain 1 becomes even more important in context of the data and in an information life cycle. So what is that we assure in the data use part is that the data is used confidentially, that the integrity is maintained or being intact, and the availability is provided in terms of whenever the data needs to be present. For example, you can take a case where data is available, data exists, but then, for instance, the accessibility towards data is not there. So in cases like this, even if the data is present, the usage of data may not be in line with what you are looking for because you're not able to access the data. So therefore, the security aspect is also of paramount importance. Once the data is used and go through its loops and hoops and bounds and its usage aspect, it is needed to be archived. There are data, for example, which can have a short life, which can be discarded on the fly, which is not needed in the future, but there are data points in business, in different organization, which have an archival value, which have a value for it to be stored. Consider the case of a banking organization, which is providing mortgage to retail customers. Now, you may not want to be in a situation that a mortgage application is approved, the mortgage amount is dispersed, and the mortgage data is deleted. Because in that case, you will get into a business continuity problem because the data for the given mortgage is not there. It is also important that, for instance, if the mortgage is given for 25 years and after 25 years the mortgage is closed, that you still hold the data for considerable amount of time based on your own organization archival policy, the regulation-driven archival policy, or any other local or global laws that is under which the organization is governed. It is important to hold the data or archive the data up until that point, because it may be useful in the future to relook, for example, if there is a legal scenario coming out of, for example, the mortgage that you have disbursed, and so forth. So data archival is also important. We will see more about the technicalities of archival and backup in the other domain, but from the business perspective, uh, archival is equally an important step in the data and information lifecycle. Once the data is way past its archival requirements as well, it could be that holding that data is of no value to anyone, but also holding that data may incur you backup cost or the technical cost that an organization may not want to entail. That's why the data disposal comes into picture. But disposing of data is not just about throwing it outside or technically just wiping off a backup drive, but it also has to be done um, true to the nature of what that data holds. If the data is on a physical paper, it can be shredded, it can be burned. If the data is on a digital devices, it can be magnetically wiped out, shredded and burned, and things like that. Now, it is important to understand that the nature of data is also dependent on other attributes, like, for example, what is the context, which is dominantly about information about the data, which is, for example, like metadata. What is the data holds, which is about the content base. So, for example, in the file of a patient in the hospital, in the file of a lawyer representing someone in a legal case, and stuff like that. And it could also be based on the what is the usage, actual uses of the data. For example, what is the actual understanding of data for a particular user. For example, email to me from my family may mean way different than an email for example, from a grocery shop where I did purchasing last week. So that's why it is also important to have that differentiation in mind. One last thing is that data requires protection, as we have said, and it also pays off that we do not under protect, but we also do not overprotect. That's why the asset classification that we have seen in the last video helps you to choose where you want to spend the money. Because if your data is public data, overprotecting it will not help because it's public data already. So with that said, I'll stop here. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the next video.